He called him a quack in front of the whole family. And the whole time, that quiet man owned the building they were sitting on top of. For 9 years, a husband watched his father-in-law build an empire on land he controlled, collect respect from a community he could have dismantled, and cash rent checks that quietly routed back to the very man he spent every Sunday dinner humiliating. For 9 years, he said nothing. He drove the same car. He brought sweet potato pie to dinners where they barely used his name. He smiled. He absorbed it. He waited. And then one evening, he made one small, polite observation about a building's heating system, a building he owned, and his father-in-law called him a quack in front of witnesses and banned him from the family table. That was the last mistake Horace Presley ever made. Because what that family never thought to ask, what his own wife never once wondered, was how a quiet man who worked from a spare bedroom always seemed completely unbothered. What did he know that they didn't? And how long had he been holding it? If you have ever been underestimated by someone who needed you more than they knew, hit that like button right now, because this story was made for you. Subscribe if you are new here, and drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching from today? Let's see how far this one travels. Now let me take you all the way back to where this started, to a Thursday evening in Memphis, Tennessee, at a dinner table where a man named Horace Presley made the most expensive mistake of his life and didn't even know enough to be afraid while he was making it. The Presley house in Germantown sat at the end of a wide, quiet street where every lawn was edged like a fresh haircut and every driveway held at least one car that cost more than most people's first homes. Horace Presley had lived there for 19 years, and in that time he had made sure the house looked exactly like what it was supposed to say about him. The columns out front were his idea. So was the iron gate, which was mostly decorative, but opened slowly enough to make visitors feel they were being granted something. Darnell Whitmore pulled his Honda Pilot through that gate on a Thursday evening in October and parked where he always parked, off to the side, near the edge, out of the way of Horace's Cadillac and Deshawn's Range Rover and the silver Mercedes that belonged to whoever else had been invited that night. But he sat in the car for a moment before going in. Not because he was afraid, because he was precise. Camille was already inside. She had come straight from an event walkthrough downtown and had not waited for him, which was not unusual anymore. Darnell straightened his collar in the rear-view mirror and went in through the front door, which was unlocked, because in this house, Horace controlled everything, including who needed to knock. The dining room smelled like pot roast and Horace's particular brand of cologne, something expensive that he bought by the case. The table sat 10, and tonight it held 7. Horace at the head, Deshawn to his left, Marcus beside Deshawn, Camille across from her brothers, 2 of Horace's business associates from the insurance world whose names Darnell could never keep straight, and one empty chair beside Camille that was waiting for him. Darnell slid into it quietly. Nobody paused their conversation. That was fine. He was used to being the weather in a room. Present, unremarkable, noted only when inconvenient. The pot roast was good. The conversation was the usual Presley theatre, Horace holding court about a deal he was working, Deshawn reinforcing every point his father made, Marcus laughing at the right moments. The 2 associates nodded steadily, the way men do when they want something from someone and are willing to be agreeable until they get it. Camille ate and listened, and occasionally smiled at things her father said. Darnell ate and said very little. It was somewhere between the second serving and the sweet potato pie, which he had brought, as he always did, which no one mentioned, that Darnell said the thing that changed everything. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without preamble, almost as a footnote to a silence. He said that the HVAC system at the South Main building seemed to be struggling, that it might be worth getting someone out there before winter hit properly, that he had noticed it running longer than it should during a visit last week, and the numbers looked like a unit that was working too hard to compensate for something it could no longer correct on its own. He said this calmly, the way a person mentions something useful. The table went quiet. Horace Presley set down his fork. What followed was not a conversation. It was a verdict delivered in front of witnesses. Horace told Darnell in a voice that was very controlled and therefore very dangerous, either the South Main building was a Presley asset and had been a Presley asset for 11 years, and that the last thing it needed was a man who worked from his spare bedroom offering opinions about mechanical systems he did not own and could not understand. He said, "Stay in your lane." He said it again, slower. Then he said the word quack just once at first, but with the particular emphasis of a man who has used a word like that before and knows exactly what it does to a room. Deshawn repeated it, not as an attack, more like an affirmation, the way church members echo a line they agree with. Marcus smiled into his plate. Darnell did not move. Horace then turned to Camille, not to Darnell, and said that he had given this a great deal of thought, and he felt it would be best for everyone if she stopped bringing Darnell to discussions that touched on family business. That this was not personal. That it was simply a matter of keeping those conversations focused. Camille said, "Yes, Daddy." She did not look at Darnell when she said it. That was the part that landed. Not Horace's words, which Darnell had heard in various forms for years. Not Deshawn's echo or Marcus's grin. It was Camille's voice, smooth and immediate, like the answer had already been prepared, and the question was just a formality. Darnell had sweet potato pie. He thanked Horace's housekeeper, Miss Evelyn, on his way out. He shook hands with the two associates and wished them a good evening. He kissed Camille on the cheek and told her he would see her at home. Or he drove back across Memphis in the dark with the radio off and both hands on the wheel. The house was quiet when he got there. He hung his jacket, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and walked down the short hallway to the room he used as an office. He sat down at the desk. He opened the bottom right drawer and pulled out a manila folder. The tab read, in his own handwriting, Whitmore Meridian Holdings, South Main Lease, Annual Review. He set it on the desk in front of him and opened it. He knew exactly what was inside. He had always known exactly what was inside. He read it anyway. To understand Horace Presley, you had to understand what he came from and what he decided that meant. He grew up in Orange Mound in a house where the roof leaked in 2 rooms and his mother worked double shifts at a laundry facility off Winchester. And he was not the first person in his family to work hard. He was, however, the first one to decide that working hard was not enough. That what a man needed more than effort, more than character, more than anything the church on the corner promised on Sunday mornings was something you could point to. Something with your name on it. Something that couldn't be taken away in the middle of the night when the rent came due. That belief became his engine. By his early 30s, Horace had worked his way into a distribution partnership that serviced telecom contractors across the Mid-South. It was not glamorous work, but it was consistent, and Horace was relentless in a way that quiet, steady men sometimes are, the kind of relentless that doesn't announce itself but compounds over years like interest. And he took the money from that partnership and moved it into insurance. He built Presley Insurance from a 2-person operation in a rented suite on Union Avenue into a firm with 43 employees, 3 product lines, and contracts with municipal employers across Shelby County. And then he bought the South Main Strip, 3 city blocks, commercial property, his name on the deed. he could walk down that sidewalk and look up at the Presley insurance signage on the flagship building and feel the particular satisfaction of a man who had settled every old argument with the world. He told the story of that purchase at dinner tables and church fellowships and the annual Presley Foundation Gala, and each time he told it, the number got a little rounder, and the struggle got a little harder, and the triumph got a little brighter. "Oh, you are what you own." He said it like scripture. His sons absorbed it completely. Deshawn, 40 years old, had never held a job outside the family company. He had a title, Vice President of Operations, and a salary that reflected it, and he wore both the way a man wears a shirt that was bought for him rather than chosen. He was smart enough to know when his father was right, and disciplined enough never to say so when his father was wrong. His function in the Presley ecosystem was enforcement. He made sure the people around him understood the hierarchy. Marcus was younger by 5 years and softer around the edges, the kind of man who was charming when charm was useful and invisible when it wasn't. He had Horace's instinct for social positioning without Horace's appetite for the work that justified it. He laughed at his father's jokes and echoed his father's verdicts, and in return he received a paycheck and a place at the table. Neither of them had built a single thing. Camille was different, or she had been once. She was the youngest and the sharpest, and for a brief period in her mid-20s, the most likely to carve her own path. She had started an event planning business with a friend from college, had built it to something modest but real, had opinions that didn't always match her father's. And then she had brought those opinions home fewer and fewer times, and the business had gradually folded into a side interest, and she had become, almost without noticing, the woman her father had always assumed she would be. She married Darnell against mild family resistance. Horace had not forbidden it. He was too disciplined for anything that theatrical. But his disapproval was structural and total. Darnell had no visible assets, no recognizable professional title, no family name that meant anything in the rooms Horace cared about. Horace said, at the time, that he trusted Camille's judgment. He said it with the particular tone that meant he did not. At the wedding reception, held at a venue on Mud Island with the river behind it and August heat pressing down on everything, Horace gave a toast. It was elegant and warm and just long enough. He talked about Camille's strength and her beauty and the pride he felt watching her become the woman she was. He talked about the Presley name and what it represented. He raised his glass to the future. He did not say Darnell's name once. Darnell heard it. He stood at his own reception table with a glass of champagne and heard every word of that toast, including the ones that weren't said. And he smiled and clapped along with everyone else because that is the kind of man he was. Patient. The question that folder in his home office was quietly raising, the one with Whitmore Meridian Holdings written across the tab in his own careful handwriting, was a simple one. Why had he stayed? Why had a man who drove a 10-year-old Honda Pilot and described himself as a consultant and brought sweet potato pie to dinners when nobody used his name? Why had that man stayed in a family that had decided before they even knew him that he did not measure up? The answer was sitting in that folder, and it had been sitting there for 9 years. Darnell Whitmore was very good at being underestimated. It was not something he performed, it was something he allowed. There is a difference, and it matters. A man who performs humility is always working. A man who simply lets the world reach its own wrong conclusions about him can save that energy for something else entirely. In the early years of the marriage, people asked what he did. He told them he consulted. He said it pleasantly without elaboration and moved the conversation somewhere else before the follow-up question could land. Most people accepted it. A man who doesn't brag about his work is either ashamed of it or so secure in it that he doesn't need to. And the Presley family decided unanimously and without evidence that Darnell belonged in the first category. He worked from the spare bedroom of the house he and Camille shared in Midtown. The room had a desk, 2 monitors, a printer, and a filing cabinet with a lock. Camille had never asked about the filing cabinet, and he kept the door closed not because he was hiding anything, but because he was focused, and focus required separation. He answered emails before she woke up. He took calls in the early afternoon when she was out. He closed his laptop at 5 o'clock and made dinner 3 nights a week and asked her about her day with genuine interest. He was a good husband. The Presley family treated him like a charity case with good manners. The pattern of it was almost impressive in its consistency. Horace's annual fishing trip to Lake Barkley, brothers only, meaning Deshawn and Marcus, meaning not Darnell, which Camille relayed with an apologetic shrug that told him she had not pushed back. The quarterly business dinners at the Capitol Grill, where the Presley men discussed strategy, and Camille attended, and Darnell was not mentioned. At the Christmas gathering where Horace gave the brothers envelopes of cash as bonuses, a ritual he performed openly at the table, and handed Darnell a bottle of bourbon with a bow on it, the way you give a gift to someone you consider a guest rather than family. Darnell drank a glass of that bourbon on the drive home and said nothing. The holiday dinners were the most consistent source of small cruelties. Horace had a habit, when the conversation turned to business or property or anything that required a man to have built something, of glancing at Darnell with an expression that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite pity. It was something in between, something that said, "I see you and I have assessed you," and the assessment was not favourable. He would say things like, when one of his deals came up, that it was complicated stuff, probably not interesting to everyone at the table. He would say that some men were builders and some men were supporters, and that both had their place. He always said it looking at Darnell. Camille, in the first 2 years, would squeeze Darnell's hand under the table on the drive home. She would say that her father was difficult and that he didn't mean it. By year 4, she had stopped squeezing his hand. By year 6, she had started using her father's vocabulary. She would say things like, "We should think about our situation," meaning his income, meaning the consulting she had never fully understood. She said it gently, always gently, but the gentleness stopped being kindness somewhere around year 5 and started being something that sounded like it had been borrowed from Horace's mouth. And she was becoming her father's daughter in the way that people become the thing they grew up inside. Darnell watched it happen and said nothing. What none of them knew, not Camille, not Horace, not Deshawn or Marcus, not the bookkeeper at Presley Insurance, who processed the same payment every January with the efficiency of a woman who had long stopped wondering where it went, was that for 9 consecutive years, $1.2 million had left Presley Insurance's operating account and travelled through a series of perfectly legal and entirely unremarkable wire transfers into the accounts of Whitmore Meridian Holdings, LLC, registered in the state of Delaware, managed by Gloria Patterson of Patterson and Lowe attorneys at law in downtown Memphis. 9 years, $10.8 million total in lease payments. But for 9 years, Horace Presley had been paying rent to his son-in-law, the Quack, the man with no watch and no visible assets, and no name worth announcing at a wedding toast. There was one evening in the 7th year when Darnell came close to telling Camille. They were sitting on the back porch in July, the kind of Memphis summer night where the heat has settled into something almost bearable after dark. She had a glass of sweet tea, and he had water, and the radio inside was playing something low and old, She asked him, in a tone that was tired rather than accusatory, whether he ever planned to do something more visible with his work, whether he thought about what it looked like from the outside. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. It was Horace. I calling to tell Camille that the family had booked a New Year's trip to Nassau and that she should plan to come, and that she should plan to come alone. Darnell listened to her take the call. He closed his mouth. He picked up his glass of water and went inside. He filed the 9th annual lease statement in January and pressed the drawer shut until the latch clicked. Then he sat down and looked at the 10th renewal notice that Gloria had sent over for his signature. He looked at it for a long time, and then for the first time in 9 years he set it aside without signing it. Pacing begins to accelerate from this chapter forward. The slow burn is over. Gloria Patterson's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Court Avenue, and it looked exactly like the office of a woman who had spent 22 years being right. The bookshelves were organized by subject, not by aesthetic. The desk was clear except for what was needed. There were no motivational phrases on the walls, no decorative items that didn't serve a function. The only personal touch was a framed photograph near the window. Gloria and her mother at her law school graduation, both of them smiling like women who understood exactly what that day had cost. Darnell had been coming to this office since before he was married. He sat down across from her on a Monday morning, 4 days after the Thursday dinner, and Gloria set a manila folder on the desk between them, thicker than his own, organized with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this conversation for some time. She said, "I think it's time we talked about where things stand." He agreed that it was. That Gloria had a way of presenting information that felt less like a briefing and more like a map being unfolded. Methodical, complete, no detail introduced before its time. She started at the foundation. Whitmore Meridian Holdings, LLC, incorporated in the state of Delaware in the year Darnell had purchased the South Main Strip. The LLC was clean, properly maintained, all annual filings current. The deed to the 3-block commercial property on South Main Street was held entirely by the LLC, which meant it was held entirely by Darnell. Current appraised value, $31 million, 11 years of clean title, no liens, no encumbrances, no complications. Darnell nodded once. Gloria moved to the second item. She slid a document across the desk, a letter of intent, 12 pages, from Nexara Systems Incorporated. Howie currently valued at $63 billion by market capitalization. Nexara wanted the South Main Strip for a regional tech campus. They had been patient, their representatives thorough and professional in their communications with Gloria's office. Their offer was $58 million, all cash, structured for a clean close within 90 days of executed agreement. $58 million. Darnell picked up the letter of intent and read the first 2 pages with the same expression he used to read the morning weather. Gloria let him read. That was one of the things he had always appreciated about her. She understood the value of silence in a room. Then she moved to the third item, and this one she introduced with a slight pause, the kind that said, "Pay attention." The lease audit that her paralegal had run during the renewal review had surfaced something relevant. All Presley Insurance had been operating the South Main Building's integrated management system, climate control, security, access logs, facility maintenance dispatch, on an enterprise software tier that their current license did not cover. They had been doing this for 22 months. Under the lease agreement that Whitmore Meridian Holdings had signed with the Presley family enterprise 11 years prior, the tenant was responsible for maintaining all software and systems integrations in compliance with applicable licensing terms. Failure to do so constituted a material breach of the lease's compliance clause. In plain language, Gloria said, They had been in violation of their own lease agreement for almost 2 years, and they had no idea. Darnell set down the letter of intent. He looked at the compliance document for a long moment, when the irony of it was almost architectural. Horace had called him a quack for knowing something was wrong with the building. The thing that was wrong was connected by a chain of paperwork and violation notices directly to Horace's own failure to manage the building correctly, the building that Horace believed he occupied as an owner, the building he pointed to when he talked about what he had built. Gloria gave him the space to absorb it. Then she said that she saw 3 paths available to him, and she laid them out with the neutrality of a woman who understood it was not her decision to make. The first path: renew the lease, accept the letter of intent, take the $58 million, and move forward cleanly without involving the compliance breach at all. The second path: decline to renew, accept the letter of intent, and allow the non-renewal process to unfold through standard legal channels, which would force Presley Insurance to vacate within 90 days per the lease agreement. The third path: decline to renew, accept the letter of intent, and additionally refer the compliance irregularities to the Tennessee Department of Commerce, which had regulatory authority over licensed business operations in the state. Each path had its own timeline and its own consequences. Each path ended in the same place for Whitmore Meridian Holdings. Darnell stood up and walked to Gloria's window. 14 floors below, Memphis moved through its Monday morning, and in the distance, running south along the river corridor, he could just make out the roofline of the South Main Strip, the building where Horace Presley kept his name on the door, but the building where a man had called him a quack for noticing a problem in a maintenance report addressed to Darnell Whitmore. He stood there for a long time. Then he told Gloria he would call her in the morning. She said she would be in by 8. He was in his car by 8:45, and he called her from the parking garage, and when she answered, he told her which path he had chosen. She said, understood, and got to work. He called Gloria at 8:46 on Tuesday morning and told her the third path. She did not say she was surprised. She did not say she was pleased. She said, understood, and asked him how he wanted to sequence it. That was one of the reasons he had worked with Gloria Patterson for over 2 decades. She did not editorialize, she did not hesitate, and she did not waste a single minute of his time or her own. Or they sequenced it together cleanly and quickly in less than 20 minutes on the phone. First, the non-renewal notice. Gloria would draft it that morning using the standard language prescribed in Section 14 of the lease agreement. 90 days written notice delivered by certified mail to the registered business address of the tenant, which was Presley Insurance's South Main flagship office. The notice would come from Patterson and Lowe on behalf of Whitmore Meridian Holdings. It would not mention Darnell Whitmore by name. It did not need to. The LLC was the landlord. The LLC was all Presley Insurance needed to know. Second, the Nexara letter of intent. Darnell would send a formal acceptance to the Nexara acquisition team that afternoon, with one standing instruction. All communications, all documents, all correspondence of any kind were to route exclusively through Gloria's office. No one at Nexara was to contact Darnell directly. No press, no announcements, no public statements until Gloria cleared them. Nexara's team agreed to these terms without resistance. $58 million had a way of making people cooperative. Third, the compliance referral. Gloria's paralegal, a meticulous woman named Cheryl, who had worked at the firm for 11 years and had never once made an error that mattered, packaged the licensing irregularities into a formal complaint document and referred it to the Tennessee Department of Commerce's regulatory division. The referral was factual, precise, and sourced entirely from documentation that Presley Insurance had generated themselves. There was nothing in it that could be challenged, as it was the kind of referral that regulatory offices received and knew immediately was serious. Darnell was home by noon. He made a sandwich, ate it at the kitchen table, and then went to the office and reviewed the prenuptial agreement one final time with Gloria over the phone. The document had been drafted before the marriage by the same firm, and its terms were unambiguous. In the event of divorce, Camille's settlement was fixed at $400,000, a figure that had been disclosed to her attorney at the time, reviewed, and signed. It had seemed reasonable to everyone at the table because everyone at that table believed Darnell Whitmore was a consultant of modest means. The figure had never been revisited. There had been no reason to revisit it. There was nothing in the agreement that Camille could successfully challenge. Gloria confirmed it in the flat, certain tone she used when a matter was closed. Darnell thanked her and ended the call. He sat in the spare bedroom that served as his office, the room with the locked filing cabinet and the 2 monitors and the door he kept closed, and he did something he had not done in 9 years of this particular arrangement. He opened the Whitmore Meridian Holdings account summary on his computer and looked at the full picture. Not just the South Main property, all of it. The LLC, the brokerage positions he had maintained quietly alongside the private equity work he had done before and during the marriage. The accumulated lease income. The Nexara proceeds that would post to the account within 90 days of closing. He looked at it for a long time, then he closed the laptop and went to bed at a reasonable hour. And on Wednesday, he answered emails. On Thursday, he had a call with a former colleague about an unrelated matter, and they talked for 40 minutes about nothing consequential. On Friday morning, he drove the Honda Pilot to the barbershop on South Parkway, took his regular chair, and let the barber, a man named Clifton, who had been cutting his hair for 6 years, talk him through the previous weekend's college football results with the intensity of someone who had personally invested in the outcomes. Darnell listened and laughed in the right places and tipped generously when it was done. He drove home. He made coffee. He did not attend Sunday dinner at the Presley house in Germantown because he had not been invited, which was not new, and because he was no longer interested in going, which was. On Friday afternoon, at 3:47, a certified mail envelope left the offices of Patterson and Lowe on Court Avenue and entered the custody of the United States Postal Service. Inside it was a single legal document, 90 days, clean notice, airtight language, the kind of document that looks routine from the outside and is devastating from the inside once you understand what it means. It travelled through the weekend. It arrived at the South Main headquarters of Presley Insurance on Monday morning, addressed to the registered tenant, signed for by the front desk receptionist, and placed in the inbox of Horace Presley's executive assistant at 8:51. Horace found it on his desk at 9:15. He read it once. Then he read it again, slower, or the way a man reads something, when he is hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic the second time through. They did not. Horace Presley read the non-renewal notice a third time and told himself it was a mistake. He called the number on the letterhead. It rang twice. A woman answered and identified herself as a representative of Patterson and Lowe. Horace told her there had been an error, that his firm had occupied that building for over a decade, that the lease had renewed automatically every year without incident, and that whatever clerical confusion had generated this document needed to be corrected immediately. The woman told him it was not a clerical error. She told him the notice was valid, the timeline was 90 days per the lease agreement, and that all further inquiries should be directed to the firm in writing. Then she wished him a good day and ended the call. Horace sat very still for a moment. Then he called his own attorney. Then he called Deshawn. Then he spent the remainder of the week trying to find out who owned Whitmore Meridian Holdings, LLC, registered in the state of Delaware, a question that turned out to be considerably more difficult to answer than he expected. Delaware LLCs were structured for privacy. The registered agent was a law firm. The beneficial owner was not publicly listed. Horace's attorney made calls and hit walls. By Friday, all they had was the name of the LLC and the name of the law firm that managed it. Patterson and Lowe. He had heard that name before. He could not immediately place it. Week 2 arrived like a second blow before the first one had fully landed. The Memphis Business Journal ran the story on a Tuesday morning, front of the business section, above the fold in the digital edition. And the headlines said that Nexara Systems, the $63 billion enterprise software giant, had signed a purchase agreement for a 3-block commercial strip on South Main Street for $58 million, acquired from an anonymous Delaware LLC. The article described the planned tech campus, the economic development projections, the jobs it would bring to the riverfront corridor. Horace's phone started ringing before 9. His peers, the men he had breakfast with at the Capitol Grill, the deacons who ran the business ministry at New Hope Missionary Baptist, the colleagues who had heard Horace Presley reference South Main as his crowning achievement at every gala and every dinner and every quarterly meeting for 11 years. They were all calling with the same question, dressed in different levels of politeness. Didn't you own that building, Horace?" He could not answer. And then his attorney called with something worse. He had traced the LLC's registered agent back through a chain of filings to a managing attorney of record. The managing attorney of record was Gloria Patterson of Patterson and Lowe on Court Avenue. Gloria Patterson, who had drafted the prenuptial agreement for Darnell Whitmore's marriage to Camille Presley 9 years earlier. Horace called Camille and told her what he had found. The silence on her end of the phone lasted 4 full seconds. Then she said Darnell's name like it was a word she had never understood the meaning of until just now. Week 3. The Tennessee Department of Commerce sent a formal notice of licensing review to Presley Insurance's registered address. The notice referenced 22 months of operating violations under the Enterprise Software Compliance Clause and listed 7 specific instances of unauthorized system access documented in the building's own maintenance logs. Subpoenas followed. Horace's attorney, who had been billing at $420 an hour since the non-renewal notice arrived, added a regulatory defense specialist to the team at $650 an hour. The money was leaving faster than Horace could account for it. Week 4. First, Tennessee Business Bank requested a status call with Presley Insurance's CFO. The call was framed as routine. Nothing about it was routine. The bank's relationship manager had read the Business Journal article, had noted the regulatory review filing, and wanted to understand the firm's exposure. It was the kind of call that ends with the bank smiling and hanging up, and then quietly adjusting their internal risk rating without telling you. Horace understood what it meant. He had been in business long enough to know that when a bank calls to check on you, they are already checking on you. Week 5. Camille filed for divorce. Her attorney filed the paperwork on a Wednesday and submitted a request for full financial discovery on Darnell's assets. She was confident. She had lived with a man she believed was a modestly paid consultant for 9 years, and she calculated that a sympathetic judge and a skilled attorney could do considerably better than the prenuptial agreement allowed. She was wrong. Week 6. The discovery documents arrived. Darnell's financial position laid out in full. The Whitmore Meridian Holdings LLC is the $58 million Nexara closing that had processed 4 days prior. The brokerage accounts, the complete asset picture of a man who had been hiding in plain sight for the entirety of their marriage. Camille's attorney called 3 times in one afternoon, The prenuptial agreement was reviewed. The $400,000 settlement cap was confirmed. It was ironclad. It had been ironclad for 9 years. Nobody had thought to question it because nobody had thought to look. Darnell heard about each development the way a man hears about weather in a city he used to live in. Noted, unsurprising, no longer his concern. Gloria kept him informed. He thanked her and went about his week. He drove the Honda Pilot. He ate breakfast at home. He did not think about the Presley family any more than was necessary. And then, but on a Tuesday evening in the 6th week, his phone rang. The number was Horace Presley's personal cell. Darnell looked at it for a moment. Then he answered. Horace said he wanted to meet. Darnell said he would be there Thursday at 4. Darnell arrived at 4 o'clock exactly. He drove the Honda Pilot. He wore a dark button-down and simple slacks, the same kind of clothes he had worn to every Presley dinner for 9 years, the clothes that had been read as evidence of his limitations. He carried nothing. He had no documents to present, no attorney beside him, no prepared notes. He did not need any of those things. Everything he was going to say had been true for 11 years. The receptionist at the South Main building greeted him with the careful neutrality of a woman who understood that something significant was happening and had decided it was not her business. She directed him to the private conference room on the 2nd floor. He thanked her and took the stairs. Deshawn and Marcus were already in the room when he entered. They were seated along one side of the table, and the sight of them there, positioned like witnesses at a proceeding they hadn't been asked to attend, told Darnell everything he needed to know about how Horace had framed this meeting in his own mind. Horace wanted an audience. He wanted the weight of his sons behind him. Darnell sat down across from them, folded his hands on the table, and waited. Horace came in 2 minutes later. Did he look like a man who had not slept well in 6 weeks, which was accurate? The particular bearing he usually carried, that deliberate, unhurried authority, was still present, but it sat differently on him now, like a coat worn on the wrong day. He settled into his chair at the head of the table and looked at Darnell for a long moment before he spoke. Then he made his offer. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said the family was willing to discuss a revised lease arrangement, longer-term, adjusted rates, terms that would work for everyone. He said there was still time, if reasonable people sat down together, to find a resolution that didn't require the building to leave family hands. He used the phrase family hands carefully, deliberately, as if Darnell were still part of that family, and the word might still mean something to him. Then he said that Camille had made some decisions that he, Horace, did not necessarily endorse, and that the family's position was not fixed, and that there was room, if Darnell was willing, for a broader conversation. He stopped talking. Darnell let the silence sit for a moment, then another. He looked at Horace with the same calm, unhurried expression he had used at every dinner table in that Germantown house, the expression that had been read for 9 years as deference. It was not deference, it had never been deference. He said, "Let me tell you something about that building." He said it quietly, without preamble, the way he said most things, and then he started at the beginning. He told them about the private equity consortium. Now he told them about the purchase, the 3-block South Main Strip, acquired through Whitmore Meridian Holdings, a Delaware LLC, in the year before he met Camille. He told them about the decision to lease it back at below-market rates, as a quiet gesture toward a woman he loved, who happened to have a father whose entire identity was built around that address. He told them that for 9 years, $1.2 million had left Presley Insurance's operating account every January and traveled through a perfectly legal and entirely unremarkable series of wire transfers into his account. He told them that Horace had paid him $10.8 million in rent while calling him nothing. He paused there. He let that number settle into the room like something heavy being set down on a wooden floor. Deshawn had gone very still. Marcus was looking at the table. Horace opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Darnell continued. He told them about the maintenance report. He told them that on the Thursday evening when Horace had called him a quack in front of the family for noticing the HVAC was failing, he had noticed it because the building's maintenance report was addressed to him, because the building's owner receives the maintenance reports, because he was the building's owner. He let that land. Then he said it. He said it the way a man says something that has been true for a very long time and is finally being said out loud in the room where it always should have been. He said, "You called me a quack in front of your whole family because I noticed something wrong with a building I owned. You paid me rent for 9 years and called me nothing. And I want you to sit with that." The room was absolutely silent. Horace Presley's face moved through several things in the space of a few seconds. First, it was disbelief, the pure, reflexive rejection of information that cannot be integrated. Then it was something that looked like rage, building fast the way Darnell had seen it build at dinner tables before. He started to speak, voice rising. Some version of this is not possible forming in his throat. And then it collapsed, not loudly, not with any theatre. It simply collapsed, the way a structure collapses when the foundational assumption beneath it turns out to be wrong. Horace Presley, 67 years old, builder of things, owner of things, a man who had organized his entire life around the gospel of visible possession, sat back in his chair and had nothing left to say. Deshawn said nothing. Marcus said nothing. Camille was not in the room. Her absence, Darnell had decided, was the most honest thing she had ever done. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket, one button, slowly, with the unhurried precision of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be and is in no particular rush to leave it. He thanked them for their time. And then he walked out of the South Main building, through the lobby, past the receptionist who looked up and said nothing, and out through the front door and into the Memphis afternoon. He did not look back. 30 days later, the building belonged to Nexara. The Nexara closing happened on a Tuesday morning, which was an unremarkable day for an unremarkable transaction, at least from the outside. Gloria's office handled the paperwork. The wire transfer processed cleanly. $58 million moved from Nexara Systems Incorporated into the accounts of Whitmore Meridian Holdings and settled there like something that had always been coming and had simply taken its time arriving. Darnell signed the final documents at Gloria's conference table with the same pen he used for everything else. Gloria offered him a congratulations that was warm without being excessive, which was exactly right. He thanked her, shook her hand, and drove home in the Honda Pilot. He made coffee. He sat in the office with the locked filing cabinet. He thought about his grandmother, who had grown up in a house without a deed, who had rented every place she ever lived, who had told him once that the most dangerous thing a person could do was build their life on land that belonged to someone else. He thought about that for a while. Then he got to work. The Whitmore Foundation was incorporated within 30 days of the closing. Its stated mission was property ownership education and small business development, only with a specific focus on 3rd Ward and South Memphis, the neighborhoods that the Presley family had risen out of and subsequently stopped looking back toward. Darnell funded it with an initial endowment of $10 million. The first grant cycle was announced 6 weeks after incorporation, $2.1 million distributed across 10 Memphis area small business owners, selected by a panel that included community leaders, a financial literacy educator, from Lemoyne Owen College and a retired commercial real estate attorney who had spent her career watching people lose buildings they should have owned. The announcement ran in the Memphis Business Journal on a Wednesday. It was the second time in 3 months that Darnell Whitmore's name had appeared in that publication, and nobody who read the first article had understood the connection. Everyone who read the second one did. The calls that Horace Presley had once received about the South Main Strip, the congratulatory ones, the envious ones, the ones from deacons and business associates who wanted to know how he had done it, those calls stopped. Different calls replaced them. Quieter ones, the kind that come when a man's story starts to change shape in a community that pays close attention to these things. The Tennessee Department of Commerce concluded its licensing review and issued a final determination. Presley Insurance was fined $1.8 million, and 2 of its 3 product lines were suspended pending compliance restructuring. The legal fees had already exceeded $400,000. To Horace's primary lender quietly adjusted their terms. The annual Presley Foundation Gala, the one with the silent auction and the gospel choir and the guest list that Horace had curated for 11 years as a monument to his standing, was cancelled. No public announcement. The invitations simply never went out. Deshawn left the company's payroll in February. There was nothing left to sustain it. Marcus followed in March, landing a mid-level sales position at a firm that had no knowledge of the Presley name and no particular interest in acquiring any. The transition was, by all accounts, humbling. Camille received her divorce settlement in April, $400,000 per the prenuptial agreement she had signed 9 years earlier in a room where everyone present had assumed it was a generous offer to a man who had nothing. She did not contest it. Her attorney had reviewed every available avenue and found them all closed. She took the settlement and moved into an apartment in East Memphis and began, at 38 years old, the difficult work of understanding which parts of the life she had built were actually hers. Darnell did not think about her often. When he did, it was without bitterness, which surprised some people who knew the story and would not have surprised anyone who actually knew him. He continued driving the Honda Pilot. He continued going to Clifton's barbershop on South Parkway every Saturday morning, the same chair, the same easy conversation about football and neighborhood news, and the slow creep of development along the river corridor. Clifton knew about the foundation. He had read the article. He did not make a large thing of it, which was one of the reasons Darnell had been going to that barbershop for 6 years. It was at one of those Saturdays in the spring that he first had a real conversation with Renata Cole, a Memphis architect who had been contracted to lead the design development for the Nexara campus on the old South Main Strip. They had been introduced briefly at a foundation event, and she had remembered him and he had remembered her, and the conversation at the barbershop went on long enough that Clifton had to remind them both that he had other clients. She was direct and unhurried and did not ask about the money. He appreciated that more than he could have easily explained. They had coffee the following week. It was a beginning, quiet and without urgency, which suited them both. Here is what this story is really about. It is not about revenge. Yes, though the vindication was complete and deserved, it is about something older and simpler than that. It is about what happens when a man knows exactly what he owns and chooses for his own reasons and in his own time to let the world find out. Horace Presley built his identity on a philosophy, you are what you own. He was right about that. He was just wrong about who owned what. A man who knows what he is does not need anyone else to announce it. He simply waits. And the truth, patient as he is, always finds its way to the surface. Now, What would you have done in Darnell's position? Would you have walked away from the beginning? Or would you have waited just like he did until the moment was exactly right? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if this story moved you, if you felt every single one of those dominoes fall, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps more people find these stories, and these stories deserve to be found. I will see you in the next one.